best in your new position. No, we've just moved down to northern Victoria actually. But I'm on the ANU email, of course.
Check. Mic check. Mic check. 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's my pleasure just to briefly welcome everybody here this afternoon for this very special roundtable discussion, which marks the presence of, in particular, of the Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University, Professor Brian Schmidt here, and the visit of the team from the Australian National University. And it's provided an opportunity for this panel discussion to take place. We have the pleasure and privilege of 3 Vice-Chancellors, Australian National University, Brian Schmidt, our own USP Vice-Chancellor, Professor Pal Alawalia, and the Vice-Chancellor of the Fiji National University, Professor Nigel Healy. And we also have with us the indomitable Professor Konai Helu-Fayman, who is, I notice, I won't go on too long, but I notice she's speaking last on the programme. So I think the Vice-Chancellors need to be on their toes because she will, be, in one sense, be responding to some of their comments. So it's my pleasure just to welcome, and especially welcome, all of you who have come along this afternoon to be part of this, and I encourage you to take the opportunity to ask questions as well. And I'd also like to acknowledge, before we go any further, Dr. Francis Koya, who will be moderating. Francis, as many people will know, is the director of the Oceania Centre here at USP and has very kindly agreed to moderate our proceedings this afternoon. So thank you. So without any further ado, I'll ask the ladies if you would kindly come in and garland our guests. Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Now I'll pass over to our moderator, Dr. Koya. Thank you.
Thank you, DVC. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Bula, and welcome to the USP-ANU Roundtable Discussion Panel. How can higher education prepare our youth to deal with challenges facing the Pacific region? I have to say up front that it really is a pleasure to have been asked to be moderator on this high-level panel comprised of a Nobel laureate, and not one, not two, but 3 vice-chancellors, and an accomplished and inspirational scholar and poet. So I'm feeling rather special. I don't know about the rest of you. The format for this afternoon is very simple. I will first introduce each panelist in the order in which they will speak. Professor Brian Schmidt, Visiting Vice-Chancellor and President of ANU, will begin the dialogue and has been allocated 15 minutes for his presentation, followed by the 3 remaining presenters who will each speak for 10 minutes. And now for the introductions. Professor Brian Schmidt is the 12th Vice-Chancellor and President of the Australian National University. He assumed this role in January of 2016. Winner of the 2011 Nobel Prize in Physics, Professor Schmidt was an astrophysicist at the ANU Mount Stromlo Observatory and Research School of Astronomy and Astrophysics, before becoming Vice-Chancellor. He received undergraduate degrees in astronomy and physics from the University of Arizona in 1989 and completed his astronomy master's degree in 1992 and PhD in 1993 from Harvard University. Under his leadership, in 1998, the High-Z Supernova Search Team made the startling discovery that the expansion rate of the universe is accelerating. Fellow of the Australian Academy of Science, the United States Academy of Science, and the Royal Society, he was made a Companion of the Order of Australia in 2013. Please welcome Professor Brian Schmidt.
Thank you. It's great to be here in Suva at the University of the South Pacific. For someone coming on their first trip, I am going to talk about things in a global sense, since I'm not an expert of the South Pacific. But I think, from what I have seen here, that everything I want to think about globally really comes down to this local region in exactly the same way that it comes down to local regions around the world. And that's because in 2019, we have moved into a time for humanity that's a little different than most of us have lived through. Some of us are old enough to know unsettled times of in the late 60s, early 70s. But also times in the 30s, and I don't think there's anyone here who's probably went through the 30s. And one of our jobs as humanity is to make sure we take the unsettled times of now and make sure they become a time like the 60s and 70s, which help bring prosperity to the world rather than war to the world. So the issues are multifaceted. The big issues facing the world include things like global health, our environment, food and water supplies, the potential for conflicts. There are economic issues that span the entire globe, and we have new emerging issues around things like cybersecurity. Politics remains in an interesting space, highly polarized, not like anything that I have seen in my lifetime. But also huge swaths of new technology and opportunities, which are disrupting the normal ways of doing things and providing both a threat and an opportunity. We are also, throughout this uncertainty, living in a time of what I would describe as great hope and progress. We live in a time where the fraction of the world in poverty is dropping precipitously, where we live in a time where every human on planet Earth is soon going to be able to engage with the rest of the world in a way just not fathomable only 2 decades ago, interconnected by the internet, by mass transit, and trade. It is that interconnectivity that is something that is leading to, I think, some of the unsettled nature of life right now. It's allowing us to solve problems, but it's also not allowing us to avoid them. We are developing the beginnings of artificial intelligence, recording data on unimaginable scales. We have new technologies that in practice can do a lot of the hard work we do and give us more leisure time, can also steal our jobs. We need to think of these new technologies as a way of augmenting ourselves rather than replacing ourselves. And that's a really important distinction, which can be done, in my opinion, only through education. Humanity is affecting our planet in a way that has never done before. We live in what we call the Anthropocene, the age where humanity's activities have global effects on how the planet works and the weather and climate, water. We live in a time where our use of water and resources is not sustainable over the next human lifetime. 10 years ago, I said, I'm really worried about my grandchildren and the world that they're going to inherit. I realize now in 2019, I am going to be alive if we don't get things right. I will see the problem. It's not going to be my grandchildren's. My grandchildren and I will share together our choices, whether or not we get things right or we get things wrong. That's in some sense very empowering, but it's also scary. It's made things very real for us. We've had the rapid rise of prosperity across the world, but in that rise of prosperity, it's created some interesting dynamics where developed countries, for example, my 2 homelands of the United States and Australia, are actually, prosperity is slowing down as the rest of the world catches up. And that's not a bad thing, it's a necessary thing, but it is one that these developed economies have never dealt with before, and they find it threatening. And that threatening of that new world order is seen in the politics across the world today and seen here on the ground in the South Pacific. We live in a time where for the first time everyone finally has a voice. The internet and telecommunication really are in the process of allowing any person to have the opportunity to speak. But in all of that ability for people to speak, there is a huge amount of noise we now have to get through. People are able to be manipulated by very sophisticated actors who are able to create polarized views of things and to manipulate the truth in a way that most of us are not yet coming to grips with. And so, again, an opportunity but some challenges we need to deal with. We live in a time, as I said, of change and unsettled natures. And so in the end, we have huge opportunities, but we also have huge risks. If we fail, we will fail spectacularly. And if we succeed, we have an opportunity of not just having a small few of the citizens of Earth live prosperous lives, but essentially all 7.7 billion of us. The solutions that are going to allow us to prosper involve technology and ideas not yet invented. They will require marrying, for the first time, sciences and technology with humanities. We need to marry the technology to people, and that is something that's becoming abundantly clear in things like cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not just having technical solutions and bringing in an expert. It's about thinking about how we do things at a very fundamental human level so that the technology remains useful and usable and interacts with people and how they work. We in the university sector, in my opinion, are probably the most critical of all institutions in finding the pathways to this prosperous and sustainable global future that I've alluded to is there. And that's because we think long term. We do not get elected on a 3-year cycle or a 4-year cycle. We do not have to turn a profit quarter to quarter to quarter. Rather, we provide people, great thinkers and intellectuals, a platform to think for decades. And that is a really important part of a university that does not exist. And in the process, we go out and we educate the next generation, and we take many viewpoints, make sure people understand what is the knowledge of today. That's useful, and those are things that my minister's always really worried about. Can people use the knowledge today to get a job tomorrow? That's good. But even more important is we give people the skills to understand how to take the things not yet imagined, not yet in place, and create new ideas, new ways of doing things. Make them resilient to the future. Make them adaptable to the future. Make them not just taking a black box that someone else has done and doing it again and again and again, but rather developing the new black box or black boxes and the new ways of thinking. So universities really do have an amazing role that goes far beyond just the today of making people employable. We do need to do that too, and that is the balance of giving people the jobs that are useful today and the skills that are useful for tomorrow, the ways of thinking. And it's an uncomfortable balance that I think any university vice chancellor struggles with, but we must find that balance, because if we do not, we will then either have a loss of confidence in what we do today by our students and the government, but if we fail the long term, then we will create a class of people who are not going to be able to adapt in this ever-changing world and not being able to solve the problems. So university is going to undertake much of the research that underpins the technological development and the thoughts about how we deal with these things, and that needs to be layered on to our teaching. And that research, the people who do that research are the ones who need to be there to teach, and we forget that. If you do not have research-active people teaching, then you decouple the cutting edge from the new generation, and it means you cannot adapt and change quickly. It's expensive, it's frustrating, it's slow, and in a 2-year window, it's always better to let's not have researchers teach, let's drive that part away and just do it as fast and quickly as possible. I'm under that pressure in Australia, it happens in the United States, it happens everywhere. And there's a short-term gain, but a long-term catastrophe if we do that. We're at the time where, as I said, we need to marry how humans behave not just within our own culture, but the interaction of cultures. We are in a globalized environment, and we need to think about how the different parts of the world come together, interact with technology, and that's hard, and it cannot be done by one university alone. It has to be done by a network of people. So one of the reasons that we are here this week is to try to get our heads around how, for example, ANU as Australia's national university can work side by side, people here in the South Pacific, and co-create both the education and the research that's necessary to solve these problems. And so I will stop on that. It has been, I look forward to being able to interact on the questions, but it has been a remarkable visit for me that has provided for me a great deal of hope and a sense of lots of opportunities to be realized in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Schmidt, and thank you in particular for some hard talk and raising some of the issues that many of us have been very concerned about, particularly bridging that gap between the unprecedented changes, dramatic changes in technology, and how that's reweaving and reshaping the very fabric of the work landscape, but also of our lives in the region. And also for raising the issue of, I guess, the reality that universities exist in today, not just needing to be seen to meet the needs of society, but also needing to remain sustainable themselves and viable. So some very real challenges. Thank you so much for that. Our second presenter is our very own Vice Chancellor, Professor Pal Ahluwalia, who began his term as the 9th Vice Chancellor and President for the University of the South Pacific on the 1st of January this year. In this capacity, he has taken on the lead in steering one of the biggest regional universities in the world, covering 12 member countries and 14 campuses. His special interest is to promote a strong research and innovation culture with continuous improvement in the volume, quality, and impact of research and enterprise outputs and partnerships. He holds a Bachelor and Master of Arts from the University of Saskatchewan and completed his PhD at Flinders University. He was subsequently at Adelaide University for 14 years, finishing as Professor of the Politics Department. Professor Ahluwalia has been a visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and professor with the Goldsmiths College at the University of London, where he was also director of the Center for Postcolonial Studies and was a professor at UC San Diego. He is a prolific writer and has published widely. He is the sole author of 4 books and has been editor and co-editor of a number of journals, including 3 A-ranked Routledge journals, Social Identities, African Identities, and Sikh Formations. Please welcome Professor Ahluwalia.
Thank you, Francis. And a very warm welcome to everybody, especially our visitors who are here today and all our diplomats who are here. I see at least somebody I can recognize from the Australian Embassy, but a very special welcome to Professor Schmidt, because it's not very often that we have Nobel laureates speaking at university, so it's a real pleasure. But also to just the warmth that we've experienced over the last couple of days with the ANU delegation. We really appreciate this. I actually want to begin by saying, of course, that Brian's absolutely right. We do live in unsettling times, and I think virtually every generation thinks about the unsettling times that they live in. And I was glad that you talked about the Great Depression and the people who would have been thinking about that as the biggest change to the way humanity functioned, the way we lived. I'm sure many people thought that when they were in the midst of the global financial crisis, less than 10 years ago, we were also thinking that we were in some sort of major transition, which we didn't know where it was headed. So I think these unsettling times are very disturbing, but that's where I think education and universities have a massive role to play, because they have to be the outliers, thinking ahead at least 20 to 30 years from where contemporary trends are, to be starting to identify what the world is going to need. And I while I agree with Brian completely, we don't know what the technologies are that we're going to need. We do know that we're going to need certain things to make ourselves, tackle these grand challenges which he has mentioned. But at the same time, we need some very simple things which will lead us to face these challenges. And when you live in the Pacific region, one of the first things that I've learned is that effectively, a lot of the problems that we're experiencing are not our making. We're actually having to deal with problems that are created in other parts of the world. And here I'm really talking about climate change, and that they are rapidly engulfing us. But at the same time, that we have to develop our own ways of coping and our mechanisms, and that's where I think climate change kind of has to run hand in hand with climate resilience. And I think that's what we're starting to see. These societies are really starting to think about climate resilience. And I think, so then, for me, universities are special places which have to empower the youth of tomorrow to be able to tackle with the mess that we're going to leave them from today, if I can put it very, very bluntly. I also think that we are probably, as Brian noticed, we are in this major transformation happening between what I would call an intersection between biotech and infotech, which we really don't know where this is going to go, but we do know that it's already affecting virtually every bit of our lives. And yet, we are in the Pacific still grappling with issues of connectivity. And I think those are issues which we really have to rapidly come to terms with. And so for me, the key things for this is really that the Pacific will have to make a technological leap which we have never ever thought about. Otherwise, our youth and our future will be just swept away as climate change is engulfing us. So I think a technological leap is going to be required. One that, I'm kind of reminded in the 1990s, just after the Rwandan genocide, when I was in the former Zaire doing some research, that one of the clear things that occurred to me was that there was no point in going back to the technology of having landlines. And so most of the Eastern Africa, in Rwanda, Zaire, Burundi, etc., a decision was made to do away with landlines completely and just go to mobile telephones. And that 3G revolution changed communication. I think we are probably going to have something of that order in the Pacific. And it might be it's 5G, but it might be something that we don't know, as Brian said. We don't know what that change will be. But I do know that there are some immediate problems that we have to grapple with. And those are, we need more young people who have secure, decent employment in our countries. We know that young people's health status needs to improve. We know that governance structures need to empower young people to increase their influence in decision-making processes. I think there's far too many people of my age who are making decisions that are going to affect the people of the future. And this is what a university has to do. It has to really empower these young people. And I think that more than ever, we know from the global movements that are happening that more young people need to participate in environmental action. And of course, these are the key things that were highlighted in that report by SPC a few years ago. But I also think that the really clear thing that universities have to also do is not only prepare I think sometimes we have a very instrumental view of the world that, we can just solve the problems through technology, we can solve them through some sort of epistemological break which will change everything. But what we really, really need is to create some resilient democracies where we create some basic values and one thing that we have in the Pacific are some phenomenal values which will empower us to face these challenges and empower our youth to deal with the challenges that are coming our way. And that's where I think a values-led education is central to our future. I think that's where ethics, where transparency, where accountability have to go hand in hand. As Brian said, the humanities and social sciences and the sciences, it's no longer that sort of C.P. Snow argument of the 1950s where, there was this in this major gulf between the two, but rather these two have to now come together. And they have to come together in more imaginative ways, and they have to work hand in hand to empower the future, to make sure that you know, our people aren't left behind, that our people are absolutely at the forefront of facing what's coming our way, and that universities have a massive role to play in empowering them. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Aluwalia, for bringing our Pacific voices to the fore and asking the core question, I suppose, what does a transformative higher education system look like if we really want to prepare youth for an unknown future? Leading to another question, what skills and competencies for resilient youth and resilient societies? Hard questions, and perhaps with even more wisdom for the afternoon, we now invite our third panelist, Professor Nigel Healy, Vice-Chancellor of the Fiji National University. Prior to taking up his appointment in 2016, he held senior academic positions at Nottingham Trent University, the University of Canterbury and Manchester Metropolitan University, as well as a teaching position at the University of Leicester. His current research interests are in the internationalization of higher education, transnational education, and higher education policy and management. He is chair of the QS Apple Conference Committee, which organizes an international education conference each year in the Asia Pacific region. And he's also a member of the Council of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, representing small island states. He holds a Bachelor Honours of Economics from the University of Nottingham and a Master of Arts in Economics from the University of Leeds, a PhD in Management from Nottingham Trent University, an MBA from the University of Warwick, and a DBA in Higher Education Management from the University of Bath. He is a Fellow of the Chartered Management Institute and a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Please welcome Professor Healy.
Thank you, Francis, and I'm very honoured to have been invited to join this distinguished panel with two other Vice-Chancellors. I was in a meeting once where somebody said, "What's the collective noun for Vice-Chancellors?" And the reply was a conspiracy. I took a pledge earlier this year not to take part in any manels. This is men-only panels, so I'm delighted that Professor Thurman is here to balance things up. I just wanted to, I think this comes at a very interesting time for us at Fiji National University. We're turning 10 years old next year. We've got a new council and we're working on a new strategic plan. And it's really kind of forcing us to think very hard about how we address the challenges facing the Pacific in terms of the sort of education that we provide and the shape of the university. So I just want to, I'm hoping to learn today really quite a bit, take some ideas back. I think in terms of thinking about the challenges, there are a number of challenges, and these have already been touched on. Climate change, I think, coming to the Pacific, having been working in other parts of the world, you see climate change, as a clear and present danger in a way that you don't in other parts of the world. The rising sea levels, the coastal erosion, the salination of soil, and most dramatically of all, the increasing intensity of cyclones as a result of all the energy in the oceans are really having a dramatic impact on this part of the world. And many of our smaller island states, the lower lying atolls, they're existential threats to these parts of our society. The second big area that, again, people have talked about is Industry 4.0. It's the Internet of Things, the connectedness of things, artificial intelligence, robotics, the changes that will make in our lifetimes and in our children's lifetimes to the jobs we do and the way society is organized. And that's already taking place at a remarkably quick pace. So you look at things like Tencent or Amazon completely transforming retailing, which is one of the biggest sectors in most countries, destroying bricks and mortar retailers in droves. And the number of major retailers that have gone out of business in countries like the US and the UK, it's a great long list as people switch to shopping online and getting online delivery. So the recent estimate was that 65% of children starting primary school today will be in jobs that don't exist at the moment because of the rate at which that's changing. Now, the third one that no one's touched on, but it's really concerning me because I do have a lot of contact with Asia, with the rest of Asia, I should say, is the demographic bomb that is hitting us. Now, when I was young, we worried about the birth rate, an explosive birth rate, and the fact that the planet would be overpopulated. And the emphasis back in the sort of 60s and 70s was on reducing birth rates. So most dramatically, China went for the one-child policy, but the United Nations was pushing family planning everywhere. As a consequence of that, what we've seen, coupled with increasing female participation in education, rising prosperity, is that birth rates everywhere have collapsed. In most developed countries, they're far below the replacement ratio of 2 live births per woman. I think in Korea it's down to 1.1. So what you're getting is a collapse in the population of young people. It hasn't hit us yet, but it's already on the way. Our birth rate's gone from 6 per woman in 1970 to about 2.4 today. And it's falling every year. Now, what that means is if you couple it with the fact that populations are living longer, the population is still growing globally, but it's becoming skewed. So that we're getting an increasing number of the over 65s and big reductions in young people. So the places that I work a lot, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, in Hong Kong, the population of young people is dropping so quickly, they're closing schools and they're closing universities. Now, what are the implications for us? We can be smug and say, well, we're okay, it's not hit us yet. I think the issue for us is that these countries are looking for labor. Now, already Australia and New Zealand are taking large numbers of our young people, and we suffer this brain drain. This is going to get much, much worse. Japan is looking for 300,000 international students a year, not because they want to internationalize universities, but because they need young citizens to fill the hole left. China is looking for 500,000 international students a year. The population in China of university-age people was 120 million in 2011. By 2025, it will have dropped to 80 million. That's a third of the young people disappearing. The same is true in Korea. So that's the big picture. I mean, we face some really profound challenges. Now, for the university like FNU, FNU's got a very strong vocational focus. It was set up back in the day to train people to do vaccinations, super medical school. So we train doctors and dentists, we train lawyers, accountants, nurses, teachers. It's very vocationally oriented. Now, the challenge for us is that, although I think we've tried very hard to look at soft skills, and people have talked about this, that we need to look at things like critical thinking, negotiation skills, presentation skills, and so on, so that people can adapt as the jobs change. But there is a real tension here between the demands of the professional bodies for highly trained people today and tomorrow and what we need to provide looking forward into the future. And that's what we're trying to kind of negotiate with this current strategic plan. And I think 2 or 3 themes, strong themes, are kind of emerging. One is lifelong learning. If the jobs are going to continue to change, then universities need to be able to continue to upskill and reskill. And the truth is that most universities are finishing schools for 18-year-olds. I've worked at universities where that was effectively, Nottingham-Trent University is one of the most successful universities in the UK. It's had huge increases in enrollments, it's rocketed up the league tables, it's a highly desirable university, and it's all built on the student experience. Come to Nottingham as an 18-year-old and you will have a ball, all right? Now that is at variance with the notion that you want to continue to bring older people back onto campus to re-educate them and reskill them. The traditional degrees, 4-year degrees or 3-year degrees that are full-time, don't lend themselves to reskilling. So I think the big challenge for us is making lifelong learning real, rather than a slogan. And that means looking at where you deliver the programs, and it means looking at the form. So I think things like micro-credentialing, where you're offering much shorter qualifications that people can use to upskill. I mean, we've just got a new centre, a Mahatma Gandhi Centre with the government of India. And what we're doing there is we're trying to offer short courses, just 3-month courses in cybersecurity or in mobile computing, so that you've got your IT degree, but you decide to specialize in a new area like Python that wasn't there when you got your degree. You can just come back and intensively upskill. But that is a fundamental change in the way we think about universities and how it supports people. The second area is entrepreneurship. I think virtually every university has been training people for jobs today. They've been training people for the employment market. And we are probably the epitome of that. Our slogan was get a skill, get a job. The pitch was, you want a career, come to us, we'll get you a job. But I think increasingly we're starting to challenge that and say, we need to look at building entrepreneurship skills and think about that in a very different way. And, we were talking before we came in here about the rapid change in the digital infrastructure here in Fiji. So we have very fast broadband, a very competitive telecom sector, pretty much universal Wi-Fi coverage. Everybody's got a smartphone. At the moment, the opportunities for entrepreneurship, for tech-savvy young entrepreneurs are endless. There's almost nothing here in Fiji that you expect to find in a developed economy with good digital connectivity. We don't have online shopping, we don't have online fast food delivery, we don't have an equivalent of Uber. All of these services are missing. But I think the young people, will come hoovering into this space. So we've already got cyber food and we've got something called Vondo. They're starting to get into this area. There's huge opportunities here, but we need to think about, as a university, taking this seriously. How do we actually create an entrepreneurial culture? Third area, something that we are trying to tackle and negotiate at the moment, is the creative industries. It's clear that as artificial intelligence, robotics move into this space, humans need to focus on the things that only humans can do. The creative areas. This is the main growth area. When I was at Nottingham Trent, we did a lot of work in China. The only thing the Chinese were interested in was creative art and fashion. They didn't care anything at Nottingham Trent in terms of computing, business, all of those things, engineering, because they did it better than we did. But what they didn't do well was creativity. And that was where Nottingham Trent had a 170-year history in kind of creative fashion. So we're looking very hard at a new school of creative arts, for the creative industries, and looking at the areas that we need to start to kind of develop. So when we've looked at this whole area, we've got a television production department at the moment, but when we started looking at it, who teaches broadcast journalism? No one. Who teaches acting? No one. Who teaches set design? No one. All of those sectors here are kind of absent. It's all cult of the amateur. I think we need to start thinking very seriously about, moving into that creative arts space. And finally, I think, is taking leadership in sustainability. And that's something, I think that's a real challenge here in Fiji, but we have to step up to the plate. All of the young people, the Greta Thunbergs of this world, they're the ones standing up and saying, enough, the house is on fire. We need our universities to be stepping up to the plate, getting behind the young people, and starting to make a difference. And, I was pleased to see in the budget last week that they announced a big drive to create a waste recycling industry here in Fiji. It's desperately over-needed. I talked about a couple of years ago, could we put recycling bins on the campus? And people said there's no point, because when the garbage people come, they'll just put it all in the same container. So you get everyone to sort their trash, and it just goes into the same landfill. all right? But we need, I think, as a university, to sort of listen to what our young people are saying and to take a lead. So, you know, the challenges are very real, and we've all three of us, I think, sketched out, you know, in one way or another what those are. But I think the role of universities and of education is central. We live in a world now where 2 out of every 5 young people go to university. You know, we have 250 million university students. We have the power to make a difference, and we need to do so. Anaka.
Thank you, Professor Healy, for fine-tuning the conversation even further and honing in on some really key issues that are of particular interest. Issues of brain drain, the mismatch between education, training, and the job market, and something very close to my heart, of course, at the Oceania Center, the creative industries, which unfortunately the region hasn't yet woken up to the vast opportunities that are available if we would only take the time and invest in developing the infrastructure and education required to stimulate that growth. And last but not the least, the wonderful Professor Konai Heluthaman is one of the longest serving staff of the University of the South Pacific. She is Professor of Pacific Education and Culture and was the UNESCO Chair in Teacher Education and Culture from 1998 to 2016. She was born and raised in Tonga, where she received her primary and secondary education. She obtained a BA in Geography from the University of Auckland, a teaching diploma from the Auckland Secondary Teachers College, a master's in international education from the University of California at Santa Barbara, and PhD in education here at USP. Her career began as a high school teacher in Tonga, and she has been on the staff at USP since 1974. She has researched and published widely in the areas of curriculum, teacher education, indigenous education, women and university management, Pacific research frameworks, and education for sustainable development. She's also held a number of management positions at USP, including Director of the Institute of Education, Head of School of Humanities, and Pro-Vice Chancellor. She joined the Oceania Center for Arts, Culture, and Pacific Studies last year, where she's currently providing mentoring and support towards the rethinking and reframing of our Pacific Studies programs. She is currently a member of the joint ILO-UNESCO Committee on the Recommendations on the Status of Teachers, CIART, and Fellow of the Asia-Pacific Center for Educational Innovations in Development. She was a member of the UNESCO Asia-Pacific Scientific Committee on Research in Higher Education and the UNESCO Global Monitoring Committee for the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. Konai is also a widely published poet whose work is studied by hundreds of thousands of school children throughout the Pacific region and beyond. 5 collections of her poetry have been published, and many of her poems have been translated into several languages, including Chinese, French, and German. Please welcome Professor Thaman.
Thank you, Francis. I should be the last one speaking at a conference about higher education and youth, because I am probably the oldest person here. Actually, there should have been a young person on the panel. But I guess the 3 vice chancellors, from my perspective, are young people, and I am the old one. It's a pleasure to be invited, and thank you for those who cahooted to get me here. I'm going to bring our attention to USP and our region. You had all the very important global perspectives and the latest in higher education there. So I'm just looking and reflecting on the USP and our region, our 12 member countries. So I have entitled my talk, and I apologize if I say anything terrible. I do that in the beginning, because I may offend you in terms of what I'm going to suggest here. The title of my little piece is called Towards Inclusivity and Relevance, Reimagining and Reinventing USP. But first, a brief history. Since I have been the longest member of staff, I have lived through, and literally lived through, several vice-chancellors. And I want to share with you a bit of history because that would provide the background to what I'm going to suggest today. The initial setup of the university was to take care of the manpower needs of our 11 at the time member countries. Our founding fathers realized that there was a great need to prepare teachers and professionals in the region because up until then, people like myself finished high school or even didn't finish high school and went to Australia or New Zealand to finish our high school education. And to prepare people for political independence, when the university was set up, only Samoa was independent, and Tonga, of course, was always independent, or so we thought. And so we wanted to prepare people to when the time comes and the colonizers said, okay, on your own now. So there were 3 schools, and schools here, Natural Resources, School of Socio-Economic Development, and the School of Education. You see, the names of the schools reflected the philosophy of the university. The structure and processes of the university were similar to those where the founding fathers came, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, and most of the staff came from there. Our recurrent budget, at least 80% of our recurrent budget was provided from, by the governments, okay? As opposed to now, it's just like reverse, okay? The aid budget was very small. Regionalizing the staff was a major focus. We wanted to get as many Pacific people onto the staff of the university so that the expatriate staff, and a huge number of them, might then leave. Some changes were made, of course, and they were made mainly by the vice-chancellors in cahoots with the university council. I use cahoot as a, advisedly, because as long as the ministers of education agreed to what we were doing at USP, that was good. And some of the changes were made by individual vice-chancellors that I still remember today. For example, James Maraj established the institutes. We still have maybe a couple of institutes, or maybe 2 or 3. Kasten was here when the law school and the School of Agriculture became part of the university. Solofa, our first regional vice-chancellor, came up with the first strategic plan for the university and had consultations in every single member country of the university. And I remember going around with a team and talking not to the Ministry of Education, but to everybody in the community about what should USB do? What can we do for you? Those were the days. And Siwatimbao first thought of faculties. We didn't have faculties, we only had schools. But unfortunately, he passed away, but the faculty notion stayed on, which was implemented when Tony Ta came and implemented in a big way by our previous vice-chancellor and president. And with our previous vice-chancellor and president, the word overseas accreditation comes to mind for me, and online learning also comes to mind. For me, those are 2 of his legacies, plus a huge management team. We haven't had as many managers at USB as we've had in the last few years, and they have to manage us to make sure that we deliver the goods that appear in the strategic plan. See, I told you I might annoy some of you. So what important changes have occurred in the last 50 years here at USB? There are lots, but I'll just mention a few. Some changes over the years have impacted USB, both positively and negatively. For example, all but a couple of member nations or member countries have obtained their political independence, and our graduates have returned in the last 50 years and have held very important and significant positions in our member countries, including prime ministers, if that is a significant contribution. They have become prime ministers, cabinet ministers, you name it, they're there. We've hired more regional staff at the university and filled senior positions in academic departments and centers. We have links with the different ministries of education, particularly with the expansion of our regional campuses. And we have focused on distance and flexible learning, allowing much better access to higher education than before. And we have more relevant research programs now, but some of those programs are being offered by the institutes rather than some schools. And then there are some negative impacts over the university over the years. For example, things like coups, which I had never heard of before. 3 come to mind in Fiji: our host, the main host for the Laudala campus, 1987, 2000, 2006. Maybe there were some little ones in between, but I can't think of those at the moment. These had major impact on how member countries perceived USP, ranging from those countries who said, okay, USP is no longer relevant anymore, we will send our students overseas, to those who stayed with us and said, we need to change it to make it more relevant again. And I am with the last lot. I still think that we are relevant and we can be more relevant. But before addressing the question, how can USP become more relevant to our young people? And I do apologize that there are not many young people here, but never mind. As they say, most of my friends are young people. Actually, most of my fans are young people. I don't have old people who are my fans, just the young ones. And young people, actually, to say youth, where I come from, is problematic. In Tonga, you are a youth, okay, if at least one of your parents is still alive. Okay, that's the Tongan notion of youth. It has nothing to do with the UN, but it says 16 to 25. So if one or both of your parents are still alive, you are a young person, you are talavo. That talavo also means good looking, but no, it means youth in this sense. So in terms of my research and involvement with some youth groups, they have problems that are similar to other youth groups, youth outside of the Pacific. You know, there's poverty, there's hardship. Actually, we don't say poverty in the Pacific, but no one is poor. In the Pacific, there's hardship. Poverty in my language is having a strained relationship. So people say, oh, poor so-and-so, because you have strained relationships, bad relationships with people. It's nothing to do with earning less than $1 a day. According to UNDP, you're poor, right? Below the poverty line. So I put poverty stroke hardship, juvenile delinquency, unemployment, obesity, education, disparity, violence, discrimination, substance abuse. You know, all the things that we read in the papers happening overseas, happening here too. So our young people have those issues. But I think of today, and some of our young people, particularly the university students, the ones in the youth groups that I know about, environmental issues, very important for them, and we heard how some of them are already taking action. Right? Climate change related issues, lack of biodiversity, loss of biodiversity, pollution, etc. Dealing with dysfunctional families and bad role model. When I was growing up, it was very, very important to learn from home about the things that the schools didn't teach us, because our curriculum was similar to the New Zealand curriculum. And we weren't from New Zealand, but we learned from the New Zealand curriculum. So we learned from home. Landlessness, very, very serious in the Pacific now. Dealing with cultural identities that now include, as we heard, a digital dimension. Young people are having to face that. belonging or not belonging to a group, certainly in towns and cities where they flock and they don't have anybody to care for them. Participating in political and other decisions where they feel they do not have a voice, and that's a serious concern of young people now. You know, they're okay to vote, but once they vote, we don't really listen to what they're saying. Having access to higher education, and this is, of course, I have been talked about, and finding meaningful work, underline meaningful. So, how can we at USP provide some assistance to youth given these multifaceted problems? Well, this is my humble opinion. If USP is to survive as a regional university in the Pacific and for the Pacific, it needs to reinvent and reimagine itself by being a more inclusive and more Pacific-centered university. In order to do this, it needs to consult more with the people it is supposed to serve, not just the politicians, and have culturally safe spaces for the students and staff who come here or who learn at USP. It needs to restructure its management systems, make it leaner, and reorganize its curriculum in order to reflect the needs of the region as well as the region's knowledge and value systems and languages. That's generally what I'm suggesting. So now just a few examples, the implications of what I am suggesting. Number one, needs to be more research directed into finding out what people's perspectives on a number of issues are, which may be different from those of the experts that we hire, or even the staff that we have about what is going on. Two, cultural competence is a major focus of staff recruitment and or staff development. Our region, the USP region, is one of the most culturally diverse regions on Earth. Specific values that are important for the successful operation of the university and need to be emphasized and modeled by those working for USP includes the following, and these are shared throughout our member countries: relationships, respect, humility, collective action, compassion, and sharing, together with, of course, the global values of transparency and accountability. Three, a reduction in the management bureaucracy, especially those relating to faculties and the concomitant complexity associated with just about everything you want to do, from enrollment to postgraduate studies to graduation to advertising vacancies and filling them, or even trying to obtain some money to hire buses for field trips, which are now being deleted, or pay those casual staff in your section. The time it takes to complete any of these tasks is one of the features of today's university. I have to admit that in the last decade, there have been more workshops and retreats organized for staff on just about anything relating to their work, usually by overseas consultants, than in the previous 30 years of my time here. This approach to staff development must be costing someone a lot of money. Four, change in the curriculum of the university, from a subject-oriented one to an issues or problem-oriented curriculum. If we want content that is relevant to the needs of students and the people who send them, then we need to stop borrowing from universities who offer subjects because they've always offered them. Many are now moving towards interdisciplinary, or what now is known as transdisciplinary programs. But you know, in the Pacific, we say that we need a more holistic approach to learning and research because our knowledge systems are like that. This means that we will be training or educating high school teachers of students, not subjects, which in turn will mean that we will be expected to better understand where our students are coming from and use the pedagogies that would help them succeed and not fail. And lastly, reimagining USP would mean taking our Pacific heritages, including our arts, our music, our dances, together with the beliefs and values that underpin them more seriously. Not as just as things that we use to entertain visiting dignitaries or impediments that we say are problems to real learning, but as foundations for teaching, learning, and research. Whether we are looking at biodiversity conservation, climate adaptation, sustainable development, unemployment, or good governance, we must now acknowledge that we are in the Pacific. We are a Pacific University. We are here for people and communities of the Pacific. And these people have long cultural histories dating back thousands of years, and who may know a thing or two more than we do, the staff and the managers of our university. We need to seriously set up real and equal partnerships with our Pacific communities, just as we try to do with our development partners. But more importantly, we need to be humble and show our communities that we are here for them, we are working for them, and not the other way around. Malo Obito.
Thank you so much, Professor Konai, for bringing some Pacific fire into this space. Yes, she, of course, raises a lot of the concerns and issues that people on the ground are asking about the relevance, not just of USP, but of universities in general. So for the next segment, what's going to happen now is I'll do a very brief summary and ask a curated question before we open the floor for questions. Okay, we will have a microphone, all right. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, please, let's just give another round of applause for our esteemed panelists. It's not every day that we have such a high-level panel share with us their thoughts, their aspirations, and reflections. And just before I ask the curated questions, I just wanted to bring into this Talanoa some very real concrete statistics, because it's all very well to talk about the uncertainty of the future and having to navigate it, but we really need to contextualize it in the context of the Pacific region that we are talking about. So the question that was posed to the panelists today highlights three main issues or aspects: higher education, youth, and challenges facing the Pacific today. It's very interesting to hear Professor Healy talk about demographic changes globally and in the Asia region, because in the Pacific, what we are experiencing or have been experiencing for the longest time is the youth boom. And according to the Pacific Youth Report of 2011, the age group of 15 to 24 years accounts for about a third of the working age population. And in 11 countries, the Marshall Islands, Tonga, Samoa, Tokelau, American Samoa, Kiribati, FSM, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and Vanuatu, young people in this age bracket comprise between 1 to 4 of every 10 workers. So they're already out there in the field. What can higher education do for them is a question that we would ask. Second, the World Bank estimates has Pacific populations doubling in less than 3 decades, and this is a 2018 estimate, with most of this growth taking place in Melanesia, where the youth bulge is already bordering on 2/3 of the population in Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, and in Fiji, sitting just under 50%. So acknowledging that higher education institutions themselves need to maintain viability and achieve sustainability within the global higher education network, and the fact that only a small portion of Pacific youth go on to post-secondary education, and an even smaller percentage continue to university studies, this really is a critical question, reflecting on the changing role or the shifting role of higher education in our region. So the first question that I'd like to pose to the panel, and it's to no one in particular, so anyone may respond. This one is in relation to the mismatch between hard skills, formal qualifications, and work readiness. ILO issued a report in 2017 titled "The Future of Work in the Pacific," and they suggest that employers are equally concerned about work-related practical skills or competencies, as many of our speakers referred to, as much as they are about technical knowledge. One estimation is that by 2020, just next year, 1/3 of desired core skills of most occupations may be comprised of skills not yet considered crucial to the job today. So this really is a context of uncertainty as raised by our presenters. So in your views, as Vice Chancellors, and of course as a seasoned scholar with vast historical memory of both the institution and of regional development, what can or should universities be doing to address this mismatch? And secondly, are there any efforts or examples underway to develop good higher education practice models which may already be emphasizing work readiness in addition to the normal or traditional roles of a university?
I'm happy to kick off because, as I said at the outset, I think FNU is slightly different from USP and ANU in the sense that its roots are very strongly vocational. It's a dual sector university, and we try. We've kind of tried to co-design the programs with employers so that the qualifications lead to a career. So work readiness and graduate employability are two of the critical things that we emphasize. All our programs have work-based attachments, for example. So we have tried to stress that. But I think you started out with something interesting, which was the kind of trying to get this balance right between the kind of technical skills and some of those soft skills. And I think one of the things that all universities have struggled to do is to, it's very easy to produce a graduate attribute that says our graduates should be critical thinkers, our graduates should be good negotiators, our graduates should be good team workers. But we've been brought up to provide education and then assess that education in terms of narrow technical knowledge. Now, I think that a lot of the accreditation agencies and a lot of the quality assurance systems are trying to force universities, challenging universities to say, you say you want graduates who are creative thinkers. Where did you prepare them to think creatively? And how did you assess whether they have that competence? And so, most universities have been going through saying, well, you've got these PILOs, these program intended learning outcomes, but where do they map down to the individual courses? Where did you teach this stuff? And I think that's a real challenge for academics because they're just used to setting exams and marking, did you learn what I told you? And can you regurgitate it? It's a fundamental challenge to the way that we actually do the assessment. So I think all universities are trying to come up, step up to the plate on that. But it's a hard journey. Just in the same way that, when we now have generation of students who are used to 24/7 access to information, but we still think it's quite okay to stand at the front of the lecture theatre and basically put up PowerPoints with information on. And, this is, again, it's a real challenge for older academic staff because they've been brought up in that tradition. But trying to genuinely move to student-centered learning, to flipped classroom, this is a big challenge. It's one of the ones that, we're tackling. But look at this lecture theatre. We're all sitting here and you're looking at us, okay? This lecture theatre is built around the principle that whoever stands here has the knowledge and you're going to listen. All right? It's not built as an interactive space where it's student-centered learning. So I think for all universities, we are trying to step up to this challenge of how we go from the old world to this new world. But the points you've made are absolutely spot on. It's a hard journey.
If I can just add to that, the debate is no different anywhere else in the world. Just last year when I was in the UK, every employer group that I met with, constant problem, your university is not producing the graduates we need. They're not fit for for the workforce. We have to spend so much time training these universities, and both Nigel and I worked in the UK at universities which were post-92 institutions, which were very much focused on that kind of vocational training. And even there, people are saying to us, you know, they're not ready. And so my response was always twofold. One was, of course, you know, as a senior administrator, I had to listen. But I had to also remind them that universities weren't just preparing people for the next 3 years in the workforce, that they had to prepare them for a very long career, and comes back to Nigel's point about lifelong learning, that it can't just be instrumental. Even a university which says that its primary purpose is to really create, you know, make sure that every graduate has a job, even they realize that the world is changing so rapidly that different skills are going to be needed. And I think universities have a absolutely critical role in that regard. And I think Konai, and I think in my own way I try to say some similar things, to say there are certain things that we have to take from the communities we live in and to empower our people so that they are not bringing these completely alien notions and conceptions within their cultural context, but making them localized and able to understand how to translate those within a particular economy. Having said that, though, I mean, I think the real danger is that if you only stay at that level, you might not be able to deal with the world that we are about to confront. And that is a challenge which I think we have to really confront as senior administrators in universities, about where that intersection is between local knowledge and global knowledge.
I'll add just a small amount on this. It is a very hard challenge we face, partially because there is a perception that every institution is supposed to do all things. And the reality is bachelor's degrees go back a long time, many, many centuries. And in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a big push that we need to give people, in addition to the you know, I would say the fairly abstract knowledge that is in them, a work-integrated learning experience. And if you're going to do that, first of all, most of my staff are not the right ones to do it, but there is some sort of mindset that says, my students, after they're finished their degree, don't go to a vocational training university to do what they're very well set up to do. And I think we need to get more flexibility in that and just change people's mindsets. But whatever we do, it has to be integrated with the employers themselves. So I will have employers, you know, I'll bring a panel of them and they'll say, but your people don't have the skills. And I'm like, what skills do you want? And they'll tell me the skills, and I'll have then another employer there say, well, I don't want those skills, I want these skills, and the other one will say, but I want these skills. The point is each employer has the skills they want, and you have to ask yourself, whose responsibility is it at some point to develop those? So I think there needs to be a new design at some level. Now, it used to be the employers took a lot of responsibility, and there was incredible loyalty of the staff of places to stay there. As that's gone away, they're not prepared to invest. So I think there's actually a structural problem in a policy space that needs to be solved. And I could come up with about 13 ways you might do it. But it needs to be a piece of policy within education that involves the industries themselves. And I think everything else has been covered off from my perspective.
Okay. I actually don't like talking about soft skills and hard skills and whatever kinds of skills. We don't have that notion in most of our Pacific cultures and languages. They're just skills, and they're all important. And I learned about soft skills much, much later. But now it seems to me that that is what we need now. We've got lots of technical skills. We have all kinds of skills. But certainly what I have observed here is the lack of so-called soft skills. And really, in the Pacific, you must have the technical skills. You don't want a doctor operating on you who's failed most of their subjects, or hire a lawyer who doesn't even know about the law. But you do need some soft skills so that these people can talk to you and comfort you, which is something that a lot of Pacific peoples have. For some reason, their DNA is contained, it's mainly soft skills. That's why we have tourists coming here to Fiji rather to the Gold Coast. We have beaches. Australia have lovely, lovely beaches, but you ask the tourists, why are they coming here? Because they say, well, we're coming here because of the people. Well, it's about their soft skills. Not about making their beds or cooking food. They have those back where they come from. So the whole notion of soft skills, I think, is a given. If you are teaching at USP, you must have those kinds of skills. Otherwise, the students are not coming to your class. Because learning for most Pacific Islanders is people, is person-oriented. It's not about your PhD. It's about who you are as a person. If they don't understand you, if you are not very nice person standing up there, they're not coming to the lectures. They won't. I've had students coming to me and saying, I said, why have you failed this? Well, we didn't go to the lectures. Why? Because we don't understand what the lecturer is saying. And why didn't you seek help? Well, they didn't want to look bad. Okay? So that's the kinds of soft skills and values that I'm talking about, that we can do a better job. And I'm not saying that we should have a whole curriculum based on traditional knowledge. No, I'm saying, Lawton, the famous curriculum experts from Britain, says a curriculum is the selection, underlying selection of the best of a culture. The best. And from school, from ECE to university, what is the curriculum for us in the Pacific? It's the selection of the best of other cultures, not ours. We do have some really good stuff in our cultures, and our knowledges, and our values. They don't feature in our curricula. So I'm saying, let's look at our cultures, the good, the best of it, the best of the knowledge systems, the ones that would help us with conservation, with resilience, with climate change, that is the sexy topic these days. Indigenous communities have a lot to offer, a lot to teach us, those of us who think we are experts on climate change. That's what I'm saying. Marrying everything and selecting the best, and not just depending on one or two or three cultures, because those belong to other people. They're not ours. Whatever is ours, we will fight for what is ours, not what is not ours. Mahalo.
All right, we have one of our technicians, one of our assistants who's at the back of the room with the roving microphone. Are there any pressing or burning questions? I don't see any hands. Yes, we do have a hand.
Thank you. I'm Mr. Konai. Just a couple of things that are kind of gaps. I haven't heard much said, and we've heard about the digital divide. We've heard how everyone has access, but I don't think people understand the reality in the Pacific Islands of being rural or outer island. And this is something we have to deal with in terms of the delivery of our education. The other thing has been a brief mention. I haven't heard one mention of sports. Sports in many of our countries, rugby, sevens rugby, whatever it is basically a religion. It is through sports that people actually communicate and learn. We used to have sports at USP. We used to have PE, and every teacher who leaves USP and goes to a rural school or even the urban schools will end up, they may be asked to teach art, PE, or something like that. But we seem to have forgotten this lately. In rugby mad Fiji, it's kind of crazy, right? And so, and sports is also one of the major cures for two of the greatest problems we have in the Pacific, and that is emerging crime and people not belonging or having a feeling of belongingness. I haven't heard much of language, and one of the beautiful things about language is that USP in the last couple of years has begun to teach Cook Island Maori, has begun to teach, well, it has been teaching Fijian. And part of the disconnect between what I see as a pretty much an urban view of what we need to do and the rural areas is language. And that it is just so critical. Field trips. One of the greatest negative impacts over the last 10 years or so is, whether it's for occupational health and safety reasons or whatever you want to call it, is one of the things that was a cornerstone and the feature of USP education, not just for the people in Fiji, but all of our 12 member countries, is that within geography and biology and marine studies and in education, a very large segment and a lot of the assessment was actually based on going out and living in a local community. They become the professors. So in fact, they become part of your curriculum, and that is a way of bridging this. But we've lost a lot of that in the last 5 to 10 years. And occupational health and safety is a concern, but it shouldn't override the best way of teaching in the Pacific. Konai always used to say, and I think it was some famous writer said, every day you want to challenge yourself and you want to do something dangerous. Well, you're not going to have education and you can't tie in with local communities if you're afraid of going out and sitting and getting hepatitis by drinking yangona in the village. So basically, soft skills, these soft skills that Konai is teaching, a lot of that can be done under the classroom outside of the walls of the university. And we really have that. Things we used to have community service. We have these students from at least nine outside member countries, and many of them don't have enough money in their scholarships to go back during the break. And we used to have volunteer schemes where the students from all of our member countries would go out and work for 2 weeks in Coral and help them build reservoirs and build schools and things like that. And the communities out there love to meet for the first time ever on Vanuatu, a Tongan or a Kiribati, and vice versa. So those are just a couple points to add to the mix. Vinavalevu.
Randy, I'm not going to really respond to every one of the points, but just because I have to actually run in a minute. But they're very important points you're making. Absolutely. I'm told that many years ago, USP had they did try a sports science program, and for some reason it didn't work. I know that Derek's office is desperately trying to do something and to try and find out how we might bring a sports program back into the university. This is critical for us. So that goes without saying. And of course, it's one of the things I said. I mean, I think we need some sort of different way, because since I've been here, the connectivity, we've done well in those places where there is a good sea cable that's there, but there are many of our constituencies and many of our outer islands where we don't have connectivity. And I think we have to keep working, which is why we're still having to deploy USP Net wherever we can. I think one of the things that gets lost, and I mean, I'm reminiscing as you were speaking to the days when I was at the University of Adelaide, and there used to be 6 to 8 students in a tutorial, and the tutorials would happen in my office. And the kind of beautiful relationships you formed with people, and the way in which those interactions were very different. We live in an age of mass education, And we should live in an age of mass education, because everybody should be entitled to an education. And those days of 5 or 6 people, and unfortunately, we're not in that situation, where we're not in Oxford and Cambridge, where the student staff ratio is 1 to 2. We're in a mass education system where, our university is unique. These are developing countries that are putting in resources for us to deliver education. Now, I think the challenge is really for us to do that, and find ways, and that's why I think what I've tried to do since I've been here is to try to become more student-centered, to say our focus has to change. And I mean, I heard everything Konai said about, management and the layers and layers of bureaucracy that we've created. But this is actually not very different from any other things I've heard at other universities. They're very similar problems, and this comes with mass education. So it would be duplicitous of me to stand up here and say, I'm just going to get rid of everything, because it's very difficult once these things are embedded within systems. You are really, really challenged to start thinking about how we do things differently. But that's precisely what I think we will have to do, because the kind of education we imagine is unsustainable. And we have to think about how we give the best education with the most relevant curriculum to a future, and as we've heard the figures, we have a young population. And as I think as Francis pointed out, it's in Melanesia where our population will grow much faster than anywhere else. So we do have challenges. We do have to think about where we have to, and perhaps one of the things that USP will have to really think about is, it has 12 countries. It's operating on the same basis in all 12 countries. It might have to start thinking about what's relevant in different parts of its own university, let alone in a unified curriculum for all 12. But that is a debate that we're going to have as a community. It's a debate we're going to have to really think about, because the implications of what we do now will have very far-reaching consequences. So I'm sorry, I've got to run, so I'm gonna stop there, and I'll let my fellow panelists continue.
Ladies and gentlemen, before Professor Alwalia leaves the room, let's just give a round of applause for the panel once again. And I know that people are probably hungry. You're probably starting to feel your tummy rumble. I know mine is. But we will allow for 2 more questions, if the panel is okay with that, with the remaining members. Yes? Do we have any other burning questions or comments, contributions? Yes?
Hello. So the burning question is, for any change to happen, it has to be sustained. Sustainable development for us in Fiji and the seeds. Now, change doesn't come overnight. It takes a bit of time, and it trickles in. So, do we have the manpower, the resources, and the finances to do these changes? Because, in most of the education sectors in countries in the Pacific, education budget is limited. So, we rely on foreign aids. Donors, donor countries, like World Bank, etc. But what we fail to realize, when that happens, it comes with strings attached. How do we actually develop our programs, so that it is contextualized? I did a few units of Professor Konai 20 years ago, and her strong emphasis on contextualize the education, which she still holds. It's good to see that. So the question is, it's all very well to say, okay, let's make the change. But do we have the resources and the manpower to support it? Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm on the firing line now. Contextualization, yeah, I think that's a given. If you are teaching, whether in the school or at USP, you've got to contextualize what you're teaching about. And for a long time, I used to say, we don't need Pacific Studies at USP. We need Pacific Studies to be a cross-cutting theme in every single program that we teach. So we always ask the question, what do Pacific Islanders have? Do they have an equivalent concept to what I'm trying to teach? Because if they don't, you're going to have a tough time with the student. Do they have a word? You know, that's the best test. Is there a word like poverty? I mentioned poverty in the Tongan sense. We were asked at one time by a group of donors to look at education and poverty, and they thought that there was a relationship between education, those who finish school or go to school, and poverty. And my colleague in the Institute of Education said, we're not going to do that, because in my country, there's no one that is poor. And you don't tell anybody that they are poor. What we want to do is look at education and hardship. Is there a link between those people who are finding it difficult to pay school fees or pay their electricity bill or their rent and education? So they agreed. And they ended up looking at sustainable livelihoods in Tonga. Okay? And sustainable livelihood, people who lived sustainable lives in Tonga had really nothing to do with their education. In fact, some people who had university degrees were living most unsustainably in the towns. And that's what I mean by contextualizing, because when we do that with our students, they really come up and they understand what it is that we're teaching. Whether they like it or not is another story. So my harboring on about understanding where the students are coming from, and in terms of contextualizing or using some of the things that they can relate to, is really to improve teaching and learning. Okay, to me, that is very important here. We want students to succeed and not fail. Now, your point about things taking time, I take that. Things will take time, but I've been here 50 years. I'm talking about contextualizing, and there are still people who don't do that in their teaching. There's the PowerPoint, and they're talking about the textbook which comes from the US or somewhere, and that's what they're teaching. And I don't think that there is any kind of attempt to try and contextualize, and that is, to me, my role as a teacher, someone in trying to help the students, pass. Because I don't think that, I hate it when I hear colleagues saying, Pacific Island students can't think critically. Of course they can. You have to put them in an environment where they can do that. They don't ask questions. Well, they're not going to question you. You're an authority figure. You put them in a peer group tutorial with 7 or 8 other students, they will ask questions of each other to death. All right? So it's these kinds of things that I think we've got to change. And we can change that a lot more quickly than you think. Thank you.
Just a reflection in a couple of themes we've heard. Resources are always tight in universities. They always will be. We always try to do more than we have dollars to do. But in trying to run a university with all these additional demands, there is a certain sense within the university around the world is that you bureaucratize everything. That if you want to contextualize things, you're going to have the PVC for contextualization. And that's not how universities have worked in their history. They've actually worked as a community. And so if you're going to have things like sport and art and music and things embedded, they need to be, I think, if they're going to be done sensibly, rather than saying, okay, we're going to use our accreditation framework to do this, and there'll be an hour in this class and 3 hours in this, which creates this whole overhead of bureaucracy, which I know everyone loves. We need to kind of go back and say, actually, let's remove a little bit of the rigor, accept the fact we live in a community. And if we go back to the beginnings, you actually say we are a community of students who are quite junior, more senior, of graduate students and things, and we try to do things holistically and bring across many of these other activities as a community. That is a way you can actually scale it up to the new size that universities are. But everyone has to participate, and there has to be a sense that I don't have to put every single person on the payroll for every part and every activity they do, but rather part of their education is being part of this community and teaching. And so I am trying to bring that into ANU as a way of getting some of these soft skills, bringing in, for example, indigenous learnings within all that we do. But you have to, it's a change back to the way universities were in, hundreds of years ago. But it's hard to line up with accountability frameworks because everyone is accountable and we don't want to actually tick it off on that. So I would say that's a work in progress for us, but I think that's how you're going to do it. And I think it makes universities something more than just a business unit of how they're being thought of within legislatures and indeed by councils around the world.
Thank you. I did see one hand at the back of the room, yes?
So there was some talk about the viability of the university and how in this age of mass education, I guess the doors can still stay open while serving what the university's core mission is. I guess one concern that I come up with is that at least in the United States, we've been given this impression that the university is the only way toward a meaningful career or purpose in life. And there's almost a bit of shame that's applied to individuals that choose to either have identified that maybe university life is not appropriate for them, or maybe it's not a method in which they can appropriately learn and I guess contribute to their community. Is that something that you feel needs to be taken into consideration when sort of developing future plans? I mean, would the university be okay with becoming less and less of seeing their populations go down, for example, knowing that income would go down because the needs of the community are changing, while making sure that there are also alternative ways that people can I guess, contribute and develop the skills that they need?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because you when you look in some of the richest countries in the world now, tertiary participation is almost a universal right. You'll find in Korea it's close to 100% of people go to university, of young people go to university. I think the way that certainly, if I just take the example of FNU, we are a dual sector university. What I mean by that is we have TAFE or TVET provision. That's the vocational trade end, from all of the basic trades like carpentry, electricians, automotive engineers, and we go through into the higher education sector. So already it's a university that people can enter and maybe just take 1 year to learn a specific trade, or they may want to come back and then upgrade to a more advanced qualification. So we've got that kind of ladder of qualifications that makes it accessible to pretty much all parts of the population. I think the trick that we're trying to get to is to move more into the kind of lifelong learning, where this isn't just for young people when they leave school and they decide, do I want to trade or do I want to go into profession? It's for people that want to come back and reskill. And you're right, we need to make that accessible in ways that we probably aren't doing at the moment. So one of them is through the micro-credentials. Some of it's through kind of online learning, taking the education out to the community rather than bringing people in. I think there are all sorts of things that many universities are trying to address in that space, so that we make university, I think what lies at the heart of your question is making what universities do relevant to the population, and not just to a kind of elite group of school leavers.
So I think that the university system is gonna get disrupted one way or another. I think the notion that everyone's aspiring to a bachelor's degree and everything else is sort of second class, I think that needs to change. One of the interesting places to look at is Singapore, which does everything to the nth degree in terms of planning. And they realize themselves what the fraction of bachelor's degree needs to be, and it's not 40%. That's not what they want in their site. It's too many. So we need to rethink how we do education. I think we're going to have a whole bunch of micro-credentialing and a range of things. I think that institutions will become more integrated into a continuum if we're successful. They're going to become for-profit players in there that can do some of the mass education that universities do right now, and that's probably okay. They'll do it very cheaply. But universities are going to have to find their niche of value adding, and it's going to have to be a little bit more flexible. And we're going to need to continue to produce people with bachelor's degrees, masters, and PhDs at the very elite level, but we don't need 40% of the world like that. It's just doesn't make sense. And trying to make sure that people have, that's seen as a pathway. And fortunately, university professors don't make huge amounts of money anywhere in the world these days. And so that pathway is not quite as attractive as it used to be. You have people in Silicon Valley dumping out of Stanford in 2 years saying, I'm out of here, I'm going to go do something else. So I think it'll happen naturally, but I think it will take 25 years. But we need to keep this much more flexible notion of what education, higher education looks like, and noting that it's not going to be a 4-year degree set and forget. Everyone's going to be coming back, including me, for education along the way. And so it's going to be a very different dynamic going forward. But how we actually transition to that one, that'll be messy, and many universities will be destroyed in the process, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. As they say, all good things must come to an end. I do apologize. We have gone a little bit over time, but we need to take into consideration the busy schedules of our esteemed panelists. So we've reached the end of our program. Please join me in thanking them once again. And thank you, everyone, who have stayed right to the end. We do have some light refreshments outside. Yes, so we hope you've enjoyed this afternoon, and we look forward to the research office organizing more stimulating conversations such as this one. Malo.